personal story I'd like to share with you began in 1995 as a young uh, internal medicine resident. On one particular night, a very, very busy night, I took a brief nap, and when I awakened from that nap, I couldn't feel my legs. And so just like that, really my life changed quite dramatically. I was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis on that evening, and life was tough for the following about a decade, where I was having exacerbations regularly. And by the time I was in my early 30s, I was dependent on nearly a dozen drugs, and largely dependent on a cane or a crutch. It was at that point in my life that I really felt I had lost hope, and this disease was really taking over me, and I wasn't really quite sure what could come next. And it was then that I had that like aha moment where I came across by chance an article that discussed the connection between diet and multiple sclerosis and chronic disease. And I was struck by this because here I was a practicing physician, trained over 10 years in the field of medicine, and I never had a discussion with any of my professors and educators. Those connections were never made between diet and disease. And so as I read the literature and I learned how diet could affect multiple sclerosis, and it wasn't just that, right? It was exercise and stress and sleep. I began to realize how important these behaviors were and how they would affect my disease. My doctors at the time were not convinced that this was of any value, and they advised me to continue taking the medications that I was on that were in large part failing me. In 2003, I made an unconventional decision to discontinue responsibly all of those medications, and instead I would modify my behavior. So the first thing I did was I adopted a plant-based diet. And the reason I did that was because the overwhelming body of literature spoke to the power that lies in a whole food plant-based diet. I began to exercise. Back in the 1990s, when you were diagnosed with MS, you were told not to exercise. It was falsely believed to exacerbate the disease. So I began with just, a few minutes on a stationary bike and built up on that. I began to manage my stress more effectively. And before I knew it, a few months into this behavior modification, an extraordinary thing happened. I started to feel better. And I can tell you that, to make a long story short, in 2003, I was walking with a cane or a crutch, and by 2010, I crossed the finish line at the New Jersey Marathon. So it really changed the course of my life. And I began to understand the power that lies in lifestyle change. And then I took what I had learned as a patient into practice, and I started to teach my veterans the importance of lifestyle. So I started a lunchtime walk I would walk with veterans. We would teach them how to eat properly. We would teach them how to sleep effectively, how to manage their stress. We would discuss substance abuse issues. And I started to see my veterans improve their quality of life and to taper off medications, or really empower them to optimize their health outcomes. So I saw the power of this over a decade of practicing in this fashion. And in 2012, I was convinced that this is what I needed to pursue moving forward, that I needed to practice lifestyle medicine 100% of the time. And importantly, I needed to do something to affect the way we train physicians, because here I was an attending physician and I didn't learn any of this in medical school, and I questioned why that was. And it was important to me to contribute at the medical school and train young physicians, and also on a national level speak to the importance of changing curricula across the country. So that's really been, in large part, my focus, is not only educating communities across the country, but also bringing awareness and hopefully change to the way we train doctors, so that all doctors are speaking to the power that lies in lifestyle. We know the scientific literature tells us that by optimizing our behaviors, we can prevent 80% of chronic disease, and we can better manage and even reverse many chronic diseases. And I think that's extraordinary, and it's very, very powerful. And So, and that is in large part why I made a documentary film. I don't know if anyone in the audience has seen my documentary. It's called Code Blue. But Code Blue is a documentary that tells my story, and it also speaks to the importance of creating change in our healthcare, so that we're not solely sick care, which is the model that we have today, but that we move towards a model that more effectively speaks to the power that lies in prevention. And I think that's a big missing piece of the puzzle in healthcare. And it is why today we are living in the midst of this chronic disease epidemic. And again, you know, the scientific literature tells us that we can prevent 80%. I mean, by example, if you just look at heart disease, which is the #1 cause of death in our country, 600,000 Americans die every year of a heart attack. We have the knowledge and understanding today to prevent 80% of those deaths. That means we could save 480,000 lives just by conveying these all important messages to our communities. And I think it's important that our physicians are skilled in how to counsel a patient on what an optimal diet looks like. Regrettably, most physicians have no understanding. They have the same knowledge that lay persons do because they're not taught this in medical school. So it's by no fault of their own. So if your internist or your cardiologist or your endocrinologist is not talking about plant-based nutrition or doesn't really understand how to advise you on how to eat an optimal diet, that's because it's not being taught at the level of the medical school, and we need to change that so that we can empower all patients across our country to live their best life. And that's really my hope for all of us. I want us all to age gracefully. And I want you on that last day, you know, at age 98, to have spent a beautiful day with your family and friends, and then go to bed and not wake up the next morning. That's the bookend, or that we hope for all of us, to have that wonderful ending. And not, you know, what I've seen in clinical practice over so many years is that, you know, the 6 or 7 years in a nursing home suffering, you know, wearing a diaper and demented. And I don't wish that on anyone. And so I think it's important that we all understand that there's a lot of power in our choices, and that we're not necessarily, and I think this is something that many of us were taught to believe in the past, that our genetic predispositions really rule, and that's not the case at all. In fact, genes play, of course they play a role, but they play a minimal role. And the most important factor is really what we decide to do on a daily basis. So, yeah. Is everyone hearing me? Are
oh yeah, no, that's outstanding. We're hanging on every word. So, Dr. Stancic, could you talk about some of the patients that you've had? And I know there's one that you know particularly well.
I think, are you speaking? Yes. Are you speaking of my husband?
Yes, I am.
Right. So I actually, I just saw your email. Yeah. So I wrote his story on the Forks Over Knives website a few years ago. But essentially, so let me tell you, my husband is this wonderful man. We've been married for 24 years, but he is an obstetrician gynecologist. And I would say about 10 years ago, he looked like one of his patients at 9 months. He had a, you know, he was a little heavy. His waist circumference was climbing, and he wasn't taking very good care of himself. He was working hard hours, and you know, eating not so well. Even though he's married to me, and we've been eating a plant-based diet in my home, but he would go, you know, to the hospital, and nurses would feed him bad food. And anyway, so he wasn't really taking very good care of himself. And on one particular day, he was doing a stat C-section, and he nicked his finger. And it turned a couple of days later, and it was actually Christmas Eve, he says to me, you know, my finger's bothering me, and I'm an infectious disease physician. I took a look at it, and it looked okay. But within an hour, we started to see his finger just really blow up. And before we knew it, so now I'm like, we need to get to the emergency room. His finger's infected. But by the time we got to the emergency room, the infection had come up to his shoulder. And this is what we call the flesh-eating bacteria. It's a very dangerous infection, and has a high mortality associated with it. So here we were, Christmas Eve, in the emergency room. And the surgeon came into the room and said to me, you know, there's a very good chance we're going to have to amputate his arm. and it was really quite traumatic. Well, they filleted his arm open, and fortunately, they did save his arm, and he was in the hospital for 2 weeks. But and cosmetically, his hand doesn't look so great, but he's okay. He came home after that experience, and he said to me, "You know what? I'm ready for that change. This was a really frightening experience for me, and I know you've been telling me all along to do all the things that you've been doing, but I'm ready to do it." So on that day when he came home from his hospital, we started, and he committed to fully a whole food plant-based diet. He began to cycle in the house, and he said to me about a month into this, as he was starting to feel better, he said, as a kid, I used to watch those Ironman races on television. I don't know if you're familiar with what an Ironman race is, but essentially it's a 2.5-mile swim followed by 150 miles on a bike and then a marathon all in one day. And he said to me, "I want to do one of those races." And I looked at him and I said, "Are you kidding me? You were like a couch potato a month ago." But he was really, I think he was just feeling so good about the way he was feeling, the energy, that he did commit to that race. And about 6 months later, he actually crossed the finish line at his first Ironman. And since he's done about 8 races, and he just is a wonderful example of the power that lies in choice. And I'm so proud of him. And if he were here, and he might come up the stairs just to show you what great shape he's in, he will tell you that he wishes he had made those changes earlier. But I'm glad he did it. We have 2 wonderful children, and I think he's been a great example for my son and daughter. And to see him, and I think also as an obstetrician gynecologist, he's treating a lot of women, particularly he works in Jersey City, New Jersey, which is an inner city community. So he deals with a lot of chronic disease, and he's been a great example to his patients, and helping them as they are young women who are planning to have children, that it's very, very, very important for them to eat optimally and to have optimal lifestyles so they can be healthy when during their pregnancies, and then to be healthy young mothers. So I think that's been a wonderful experience. As far as other patients, again, if you've seen the film, we have several examples of patients of mine who have really transformed their lives. There is I should mention this because this is something that I often talk about, and it was something that I could have never predicted when I started my practice. So in 2012, when I started my lifestyle medicine practice, I had 0 patients and 0 stream of referral, because really no one knew what lifestyle medicine was. And I was known as an infectious disease specialist here in the New York area. So my colleagues who knew me as such for so many years said to me, are you kidding me? You're going to leave your infectious disease practice and you're going to start a new clinical practice, and you're going to, and it's all about what? Telling patients to eat plants? So they thought I was losing my mind. So I did, it was difficult at first because I didn't really have a patient pool, but patients started to call in, and the practice began to really grow organically. Patients would come in and, with poorly controlled diabetes or poorly controlled hypertension, obesity, and we saw patients transform their lives. But here's the wonderful thing that I could have never predicted, is that in my practice today, I have about 40 to 50 patients that are also doctors. And the way that happened was that at one point we had a patient in common. Like I had a poorly controlled diabetic that came to see me, and we worked on modifying their lifestyle, and they reversed their diabetes. They lost the weight, they tapered off of all the medications, their cholesterol improved, we were able to get them off their statin. And then they go back to see their doctor for their yearly visit, and their doctor's like, "What did you do? I didn't even recognize you. Your blood work is amazing. Oh, I went to see this lifestyle medicine doctor. Her name is Dr. Stancic, and this is what we've done." And then the doctors would call me and ask me about what I was doing. And we would have a conversation, and then they would say, I want to come see you. And I always, at first I would think, it's just a peer colleague, we'll have a cup of tea. No, I want to come see you as a patient, because I'm overweight. I have hypertension, and I have, whatever, and then they would come to see me. So that's been wonderful, because having any patient that I have, of course, is a blessing and a privilege to care for them. But when I have a patient who's also a doctor, it's really an extraordinary opportunity, because I know that I'm not only helping that individual as a patient, but it also changes the way that they practice moving forward. And that to me is really very powerful, because then we're able to affect so many patients. And one of the patients that is in the film is a patient of mine who is a surgeon, who initially came to see me because she had poorly controlled an autoimmune disease called ulcerative colitis, and she was struggling with obesity and pre-diabetes. And she came to see me, I believe in 2016 for the first time. And she's been dealing with ulcerative colitis for, I say 10 to 15 years. And every year she would have a colonoscopy, and the colonoscopy would show a lot of inflammation, and she was dependent on medication throughout this time. And I can tell you, within 6 months of changing her diet and changing her lifestyle, she had a second colonoscopy, another colonoscopy, and there was no evidence of inflammation. And at that point, she cut her medication in half. And then a year later, another colonoscopy showed no inflammation, and she was able to come off all of her medication. So she's an extraordinary story, and she tells her story in the film Code Blue. Has anyone seen the film?
No. So can you give us the information on how we can access the film?
Yes.
Well, go ahead.
Right. So currently, right now, the film is only available for screenings. So you could do a screening at your,
At the group?
For your group. Sure. You can do that. I just signed a deal with Virgil Films, which is the distribution company that distributed Forks Over Knives. So I'm in great company with that organization. And I think the plan is to launch the film in May. So in May, you'll be able to download it for personal use or to buy a DVD if that's something that you like. But I think it would be great to have a screening. Screenings are, for a group like you, I think would be wonderful. And I think it's an opportunity to do a Q&A afterwards to discuss the content of the film. But for me, the film was really about speaking to the science. So we actually talk about the literature that overwhelmingly supports this idea that lies in, this idea of lifestyle medicine, rather. And throughout the film, you'll meet some of my patients and some of my medical students who are now practicing medicine. And I think that's really important, Terry, is this idea that that our next generation of healthcare professionals is skilled and educated in understanding the aspects of lifestyle medicine. I think that should be the foundation on which we build all else. All doctors, nurses, anybody who's involved in the healthcare experience should understand the importance of behavior, and we should be examples for our patients. I think that's really important. My community knows that what I preach is what I practice. So, I often will ride my bike into my office, or I walk with my patients regularly in a local park, and we do cooking classes and we do yoga classes together. So certainly being an example for the community, I think, is also very powerful.
Well, I don't know if it's coincidence or not, but we do not have at this point, a February speaker. It might be a perfect opportunity. How many, can I see a show of hands? How many people would like to see a screening next week? All right. I think you got a screening. So how long is that film, Doctor?
The film runs an hour and 30 minutes.
An hour and 30 minutes. Okay. So our library just changed its, it'll be tough. And you possibly would be available for Q&A at the end of that?
Sure. Yeah.
Sure. So I will get in touch with you by tomorrow, if you're available tomorrow, and see if we can start working on that.
That'll be great.
Great. So we have a little bit of time for Q&A. First of all, thank you. So we have a little bit of time for Q&A, but Ted, you want to?
Yes. Doctor, I have gone a whole hog into vegan in the last month. I'm having some insomnia. You ever heard of that?
Did you hear that question?
No, I can't
Yeah,
hear you.
the question was, this is a fellow who started going plant-based about how long ago?
About a month.
About a month ago, but now he's having some insomnia issues. And insomnia issues. So he's wondering if, what to do, how to get some sleep.
Well, I don't think, well, I hope you're not associating your plant-based diet with insomnia.
Well, you didn't have insomnia before and you have it now. You didn't have it before, but you have it now. So yeah, I haven't run across this certainly myself.
No, I haven't either. I mean, we could speak for a moment on effective sleep hygiene. So sleep hygiene is really, really important, right? So there's some structure. You have to create structure around sleep in order to be a really good sleeper, right? So let's talk about your environment for a moment. So our bedroom. So your bedroom should be cool, dark, and quiet. Okay, so cool, dark, and quiet. So typically, the National Sleep Foundation says it's somewhere between 67 and 69 degrees. So on the cool end, dark, meaning that you should not have any screens in your bedroom, like no television screens. You shouldn't be staring at your phone right before you go to bed. How many of you keep your phone right next to you and check email and text messages? Don't do that. Don't do that, because when you look at your phone or your iPad, that blue light that emits, it affects the retinal ganglion cells, and there's a very important communication between the back of the eye and the pineal gland, which releases melatonin, which is our kickoff to sleep. So when you do that, when you're staring at your phone or a screen, some of us will read on our iPad, that affects your ability to sleep well. So it's really, really important that you avoid that. And the room should be quiet, right, if at all possible. And then it's really important, again, creating structure, that your go to bed time and your wake up time, that those are pretty fixed. I mean, obviously there are days where that would be hard, like New Year's Eve, your schedule is going to be off. But in general, keeping your schedule pretty strict is important so that you can get into those deep sleep cycles. So for me, 9 o'clock is my bedtime, which is coming up soon. But I wake up at 5, right? And like clockwork, I get up at 5. And I can tell you that as a young woman, I would have definitely defined my sleep as somebody who suffered with insomnia. I had erratic sleep schedule. I was always worried or concerned about, medical school or residency or my boards. So what I like to do, and it's important to also engage in some good pre-sleep habits, like maybe a little bit of meditation. A warm shower helps you to sleep. And the other thing that I think is important is avoiding alcohol. Alcohol can be very problematic and it affects our sleep. So, if you drink, it's going to help you fall asleep for sure. But if you've ever done that and you know that what happens, you're going to wake up at 2, 3 o'clock in the morning and you're not going to feel so good and you're not going to be able to fall back asleep. So alcohol definitely affects our ability to sleep well. But the gentleman, although I can't see him and I really can't hear him, I assure you that your plant-based diet is not contributing to your insomnia. There may be something else going on. So it'd be important for you to sit and talk to your doctor and really discuss everything else that's going on.
Sure. And I'll repeat another question, and I'll repeat them if you can't hear them.
I wanted to ask you a question. She mentioned the huge number of deaths as related to heart failure or cardiac arrest. And I have an issue with that sometimes. What role do you think sugar is playing? I mentioned that. We mentioned diabetes a lot. There's a huge craving for sugar in this country, the way it's being marketed. What role do you think sugar played in all those cardiac arrests? I mean, what do you think about sugar?
Could you hear that one?
What do I hear?
About sugar and heart health.
Sugar and heart health. Well, I mean, it's not so much the sugar that's the villain, it's the processed foods, right? That's really what's contributing to. So if you look at the American diet, this, we call it the SAD diet, the standard American diet. It's composed primarily of processed foods and animal sources of food. So animal sources account, between those two, it accounts for about 80% of our calories. Plants actually only contribute about 12%. And if you drill down and you look at the specifics of that, it's 6% is actually real, like whole foods, like apples and pears and sweet potatoes, and the other 6% is the apple in an apple pie or the nuts in your chocolate bar. So the average American is consuming only 6% of their calories from whole foods, the foods that we know are medicinal and life-saving, right? So I think there's this, we like to label foods as villains, like sugar is bad, fat is bad, but it's really not that. I want you to not think of food as a macronutrient, like we tend to speak or point to food as like a carbohydrate or a protein or a fat. I want you to start thinking of food as a whole food. So what you want to consume primarily are foods in their natural state, right? So as soon as you take an apple and you pick it off the tree and you press it and you turn it into apple juice or apple sauce, you've compromised it. You in some way processed it. So some of the nutrition, the value of that food is compromised. So what we want to avoid is these foods that are labeled hyperpalatable, meaning that hyperpalatable foods are foods that are layered with sugar, salt, and fat. Those are the culprits. And there's a wonderful book written by Dr. David Kessler, called The End of Overeating. And what's happened in the American palate over the past, 40 years is that we're becoming more and more addicted to these hyperpalatable foods. There are food scientists, regrettably, that understand these connections between the brain and the gut. And there are certain foods that when we place them in our mouth, it elicits a really wonderful response from our brain, right? And that keeps us addicted. And these food scientists at big companies that create these, like, Oreo cookies or Tostitos, not that I'm saying, I shouldn't speak to any particular brand, but you know what I'm saying? Like, you can't just eat one Oreo cookie, right? You have to eat the whole sleeve. And that's not because it's not that there's something wrong with you or that you're broken or that you are, I often hear patients say, I have a sweet tooth or I have, a savory tooth. It's not you. It's just that these foods are manipulated and produced to keep you addicted. So you have to become aware of that. So it's not that sugar is the villain or that fat is the villain. It's these processed foods that lead to they're calorically dense and nutritionally deficient. So you want to stay away from those packaged processed foods, and you want to eat more foods like what your great-great-grandmother would have considered as real food, right? So some of these, like a Twinkie, she wouldn't even recognize what that was. These highly processed foods that are manipulating us and keeping us coming back to buy more and more of it. And there's a lot of calories and no nutrition. So think about it. If you pick up an apple has, it's an extraordinary food. It's delivering a ton of fiber. It's delivering phytochemicals and phytonutrients that are so important in maintaining cellular health and ensuring that we keep the good genes turned on and quieting the bad genes that promote chronic disease. So it's really about, and eating healthfully is really quite simple. It's just about eating more plants and eliminating, or I don't know what this audience is, where you are on the food spectrum, but you don't necessarily have to be a strict vegan. What you need to do, you can start out by simply looking at your plate, right? Let's say you said to me, I love steak and there's just no way I'm going to give that up right now. So I would say to you, okay, so, when you go to a restaurant and you order a steak, it takes up half of your plate. And then there's a potato, and then they put sour cream and butter on it. right? And then the only colorful thing on it is some like green garnish, and nobody eats that, right? That's just there to make the plate look pretty. So how about we compromise, and let's, instead of the steak taking up half of your plate, make it a quarter of your plate. And the potato, instead of putting sour cream and butter on it, embarrassing this poor potato, instead just put some salt and pepper on it, or some herbs that you like. And then the rest of that plate, we're gonna fill to the brim with colorful vegetables, right? So whatever you like, carrots, Brussels sprouts, asparagus, would fill that plate with fiber-rich, phytonutrient-rich vegetables, because those are the key. That's what's going to maintain health and wellness. And little by, what ends up happening is, little by little, the patients realize that, when I eat this food, I feel good. My weight's controlled, my cholesterol is better, my blood sugars are improved, my mood is better, my energy is better, my mind is clearer. And guess what? They start to taper off, and that animal comes off the plate, and they start to eat in a plant-centered fashion, and they really start to benefit extraordinarily from that change. But you don't have to do it all overnight. I didn't do it all overnight. It took time, but the benefits are undeniable. And I mean, even something like Alzheimer's disease, there's so much evidence now that points to the importance of a primarily plant-based diet and lifestyle and exercise and social interconnections. There's another wonder. I think Terry had mentioned having the Scherzeyes meet with you or call in one evening. The Scherzeyes are two fantastic neurologists at Loma Linda who are doing a lot of work and wrote a wonderful book called The Alzheimer's Solution. I would highly recommend to anyone who's interested. Terry, I think you mentioned to me that you were going to invite.
I hope to get them, and there's a copy of the Alzheimer's Solution on the table back here, so on your way out, if you want to take a picture and see what it is. We've got maybe...
Can I just plug my book?
Sure. Oh yeah, sure, go for it.
Well, it's not ready yet. I just finished my first draft of my book, and I'm so excited. It'll be released in the fall of this year, and it's essentially a book that is just a roadmap to anybody who wants to implement changes in their life. So I call it the lifestyle medicine wheel, and there's 6 spokes on the lifestyle medicine wheel. So in the book, I'm going to talk about nutrition and physical activity and stress and substance abuse issues and social interconnectedness. So there's a chapter on each spoke, and I'm really excited about it, and it'll be coming in the fall.
All right. Oh, great. We have about maybe 10 minutes left, and try to get in maybe 3 questions or 3 or 4. Sure.
Well, I have one question. You work with you work with lifestyle, and I'm wondering about the effect of cosmetics. A long time ago, I took a human physiology class, and one of the professors told us that at that time, the formulation for hair dyes, which has changed since 50 years ago, but was among the most carcinogenic things that interface with us, and it could be absorbed through our scalp, and it could cross the placenta. And I'm wondering, do you deal with issues like that? Because that's a very common thing, particularly for women.
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm not fluent enough in that area to speak to it, but I know that there was a recent publication of hair dye and a possible connection with breast cancer. And I have a good colleague of mine who was a breast cancer surgeon. Actually, she's in the film in Cold Blue, who wrote a little piece on it. I can actually reach out to her, and I don't know the specifics of it, but yes, I mean, I think that with anything, and another question that often comes up is, when I'm, comes up in either, lectures or patients will ask me about organic versus conventional. These are questions that are all important. We just don't have the specific science to help really characterize or understand it. But it would make sense to me that Organic vegetation would be optimal over conventional. I mean, if we're spraying things with pesticides and or organicides, and then obviously to me that would be less optimal. But the literature that we have, the publications that we're talking about in the film and in the public, like the Potsdam study that showed, Potsdam study is a study that's often quoted by lifestyle medicine physicians. It was a large study that was done in Potsdam, Germany, and where they looked at 23,000 patients, and they found that those that ate a primarily plant-based diet, walked 30 minutes a day, maintained a healthy weight, and didn't smoke, if they adhere to those 4 healthy lifestyle behaviors, 80% of chronic diseases would be prevented in those patients, and that's a study again that is often quoted. In those studies, the vegetation there was conventional. It wasn't organic. So we don't have a study that compares conventional fruits and vegetables versus organic. But the question that you asked about cosmetics and hair dyes, I think that's a really important question, and it needs to be studied. I just don't know if we have a clear-cut answer today.
Thank you.
Could I just ask, she said 4 things, and I wrote down 3. I missed.
Oh, what were the 4 things in the Potsdam study that the healthy people did?
Oh, primarily plant-based diet, 30 minutes of exercise every day, not smoking, and maintaining a healthy weight.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Sure.
I understand that you pretty much reversed your MS through the plant-based diet. I've got a brother-in-law who's about 70 who has had MS for several decades. It's quite advanced now. Do you know of any instances of someone in that condition being able to reverse their MS through the diet?
Yeah. Well, no. I think when there's at that, it sounds like, and I don't know the specifics, but this is really the greatest benefit is to start this as early as possible, where there, in some patients where there's, damage beyond repair. I think that, again, multiple sclerosis, just to be clear, is an autoimmune disease. And the way that what happens in MS is that the immune system, which is supposed to be there to fight off foreign pathogens and protect you against infections and cancer, in autoimmune disease, it's confused, your immune system. It starts to attack you. And in multiple sclerosis, it attacks myelin, which is the fatty sheath that protects the brain, spinal cord, and the nerves to the back of the eye. So it starts to pop holes in that myelin. And if it's not managed over time, these holes, once they get very big, or there's many of them, it's irreparable damage. So at that point, there's really not much that can be done. But it's really very interesting. And I wouldn't say that I never say that I'm cured or that I've reversed my MS. I say that I manage my MS. I still live with multiple sclerosis, and I can tell you that if I didn't do the things that I do every day, for example, if I start to travel too much, or I'm not sleeping effectively, or not eating properly, I do have setbacks. So it's really important that I stick to my schedule as closely as possible. And it's interesting that we really, one of the questions that are often asked, well, how can changing your diet affect an autoimmune disease that attacks your brain and spinal cord? And if you could follow me on this, this is an oversimplification, but the evidence that we're seeing in the past, particularly in the past 5 to 10 years, is it helping us to understand how that is. When you eat a plant-based diet is rich in fiber, right? So fiber is really the key to all of this. When you eat a fiber-rich diet, you affect the makeup of the microbiome, that is the bugs in your gut, right? So if you've heard about that, we have 3 to 5 pounds of bacteria, virus, and fungi that live in our gut. And when we eat a fiber-rich diet, guess what? The good bugs in your gut, they like fiber. So when you eat a lot of fiber, you're feeding the good bugs, and they proliferate, and they become the main guys in this gut, in this bacteria neighborhood. And that's good, because the good bugs produce chemical signals that then communicate with your immune system and either tell your immune system to go do bad things or to behave. And so what we're learning is that in MS, when you eat a fiber-rich diet, it may very well be that we're changing the bugs in the gut, and then those bugs are producing positive signals that then tell the immune system stop attacking her brain and spinal cord, and that may very well be the connection. So that's really exciting. There's 2 studies that were published in the past 2 years. One was done at Mount Sinai in New York, and another in Milan, Italy, that is giving us that information. So that's exciting.
May I ask something right on the end of that? And you were talking about fiber. So the difference between fiber in an apple and fiber in a sweet potato and Metamucil is, somebody hears fiber and thinks, well, I'm going to just start taking Metamucil and continue on a standard American diet. Right.
It doesn't work. And there was a study that they did at the NIH years ago where they, we know that people who eat a fiber-rich diet have reduced risk of colon cancer, right? So what did they do? They did a study where they put one group on a high fiber, it wasn't a high fiber diet. They just put them on Metamucil. And what they found was that those folks didn't have a reduced risk of colon cancer. They had the same risk, because it doesn't work the same. We can't take a nutrient out of a whole food and put it in a pill. It doesn't work the same way. Like if you take beta carotene out of the sweet potato and put it in the pill, it doesn't reduce your risk of breast cancer. It doesn't reduce your risk of prostate cancer. You have to eat the food in its natural state, because how it sits in that, it almost works like a symphony. All these nutrients work together in a really magical way, and we just you can't reproduce it in a pill. So if someone tells you, just take this supplement or that supplement, it doesn't behave the same way. Just eat the real food, and that's the way you're going to arrive at the best nutrition for your optimal health.